The wagon wheel snapped with a sound like a gunshot, sending Margaret Maggie Caldwell tumbling into the dust. She landed hard on her knees, canvas satchel clutched against her chest, as the wagon lurched to a stop. The October sun beat down mercilessly on the Dakota Territory Trail, turning the air into a shimmering wall of heat. "Damn it all to hell," Buck Harrigan, the wagon master, spat tobacco juice into the dirt, his weathered face twisted with disgust as he examined the broken wheel. "This here's the third time this month." Maggie pushed herself to her feet, brushing dust from her worn calico dress. Her palms stung where they'd scraped against the rocky ground. The other passengers, 2 miners heading to the Black Hills and a preacher's wife, climbed down to stretch their legs while Buck and his assistant worked on the wheel. "How long?" asked one of the miners, a burly man named Jefferson. "Hour, maybe 2, Buck grunted. He shot a dark look at Maggie. "Though we'd make better time with less weight." The words hung in the air like a threat. Maggie's heart began to pound. She'd been expecting this moment since they'd left Fort Pierre 3 days ago. Buck had been suspicious from the start, questioning her story about heading west to work as a schoolteacher. The truth was simpler and uglier. She was running, and she'd lied about more than just her destination. "Missy." Buck straightened, wiping greasy hands on his pants. "We need to have ourselves a talk." The other passengers drifted away, suddenly interested in the distant buttes. Maggie lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. At 20 years old, she'd learned to make herself seem older, more capable. But Buck's eyes saw through the facade. "You told me you was 23, he said. "Told me you had teaching papers. Told me your husband died of fever." He spat again. "Funny thing is, when we stopped at that trading post yesterday, old Pete there said he'd seen your likeness on a paper. Said someone back east was looking for a runaway girl." Maggie's mouth went dry. She'd torn up those papers, burned them in a dozen campfires between Pennsylvania and here. But news traveled even to the frontier. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed. Buck's laugh was harsh. "Sure you don't? Look, I don't care what you're running from. Half the folks out here are running from something. But I can't have trouble following my wagon. Bad for business." "I paid my fare," Maggie said. $20, cash money. "And I'm giving it back." Buck pulled a leather pouch from his vest, counted out coins. "Take it and your things. There's a settlement maybe 15 miles south. You're young and strong. You can make it before dark if you start walking now." "You can't just leave me here." The words burst out before Maggie could stop them. Fear made her voice crack. "There's nothing out here but Indians and wolves." "Should have thought of that before you started lying." Buck turned back to the broken wheel. "Get your things. We're moving on soon as this is fixed." The preacher's wife, a pinch-faced woman who hadn't spoken 10 words the entire journey, pressed a canteen into Maggie's hands. "The Lord provides for the righteous," she murmured, though her eyes held more judgment than compassion. Maggie wanted to laugh. Righteous. She'd left righteousness behind in a burning barn 6 months ago, along with her father's body and any claim to innocence. The memory rose unbidden, smoke filling her lungs. Her step-uncle Samuel's drunken rage, the sound of timber cracking. She'd gotten out. Her father hadn't. She gathered her few possessions, the canvas satchel with 2 spare dresses, a leather-bound Bible she couldn't bring herself to abandon, $43 sewn into her corset, and the wooden comb her mother had carved before she died. Everything she owned in the world fit in a bag she could carry with one hand. The wagon rolled away in a cloud of dust, leaving her standing alone on the trail. The vastness of the landscape pressed in, endless grassland rippling like a golden ocean, broken only by scattered stands of cottonwoods along dried creek beds. To the west, the Black Hills rose like dark teeth against the horizon. Maggie had never felt so small. She started walking south, following Buck's vague directions. Her boots, city boots, meant for cobblestones not prairie, began rubbing blisters within the first mile. The canteen grew lighter with each sip, but she couldn't stop drinking. the sun was brutal, and there was no shade except what her own shadow provided. By late afternoon, she'd lost the trail. It had seemed clear enough at first, 2 wagon ruts cutting through the grass, but the ruts branched and merged, crossed other trails, disappeared into rocky ground. She stood at yet another fork, trying to remember if the settlement was southeast or southwest. The Black Hills had shifted position as she walked, and now she wasn't sure which way was which. Panic fluttered in her chest. She forced it down. Panic was what got you killed out here. She'd heard enough stories to know that. Think, Maggie, what would Father have done? But Father was dead, and he'd never been west of Pittsburgh anyway. The sun touched the horizon, painting the grassland crimson and gold. She needed shelter, water, something. Following the advice of a half-remembered dime novel, she headed for a line of trees that might mark a creek. Her feet screamed with each step, blisters broken and bleeding. She almost missed the smell of smoke. It drifted on the evening breeze, faint but unmistakable. Where there was smoke, there were people. She followed her nose, cresting a low rise to see a small campfire flickering in a grove of cottonwoods. A single figure sat beside it, back turned to her. Relief flooded through her. "Hello," she called, stumbling down the slope. "Hello, I'm sorry to intrude, but I'm lost and—" The figure turned, and the words died in her throat. He was Indian. Lakota, probably, though she couldn't be sure. Somewhere in his 30s, with long black hair worn loose and a face that might have been carved from the same stone as the hills. He wore a mix of traditional and white man's clothing, leather leggings, a cotton shirt, a knife at his belt. His dark eyes regarded her with wariness but not hostility. They stared at each other across the fire. Maggie's hand went instinctively to her throat, though he'd made no threatening move. Every story she'd heard about Indians flooded back scalping. Torture. Worse things whispered about when men thought women weren't listening. But she was also exhausted, thirsty, and alone. And the way he sat, relaxed, patient, like a man with nothing to prove, didn't match the lurid tales. "Water?" she asked finally, miming drinking. He nodded to a water skin near the fire. When she hesitated, he picked it up himself, took a drink, then held it out to her. "See safe." The water was warm, but clean. She drank greedily, then made herself stop. "Thank you," she said. I was with a wagon, but—" She gestured vaguely at the darkening prairie. He nodded as if unsurprised. White people got lost out here all the time. He said something in Lakota, then, seeing her blank look, tried again. "You sit." The English was accented but clear. She sat on the opposite side of the fire, trying not to wince as she pulled off her boots. Her feet were a mess. Blisters, blood, and prairie dust. She heard him make a sound, disgust sympathy, and looked up to see him pulling something from a parfleche bag. He tossed it to her, a tin of salve that smelled of herbs and animal fat. She looked at him questioningly, and he pointed to her feet. Medicine. As she tended her feet, he went back to what he'd been doing, cutting strips of dried meat with efficient strokes of his knife. He laid several pieces on a flat rock near her, along with some kind of dried berries. Food. He was feeding her. "I can pay," she said quickly, reaching for her satchel. He shook his head. "No." A stream of Lakota followed, but she caught the tone, dismissive, almost amused. Did she really think he needed her money? They ate in silence. The meat was tough but filling, the berries tart. Stars began emerging overhead, more stars than she'd ever seen in Pennsylvania. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. He spoke again, pointing to himself. "Matho Sapa." Then, seeing her struggle with the sounds, he simplified. "Matto." "Maggie," she replied. Then, "Margaret, Maggie." "Maggie." He tested the syllables, nodded. Then he pointed east, made a walking motion with his fingers, shook his head. No walking east tonight. He pointed to the ground near the fire, then to her, then made a sleeping gesture. Sleep here, by his fire, under his protection. Every proper instinct rebelled. Sleep near a strange man. An Indian. But what choice did she have? The prairie at night would kill her as surely as any human threat. Your people? She asked, looking around nervously. He understood. North, he said, pointing. 2 days. Then he pointed to himself, made a circular motion. Scouting, perhaps, or hunting alone. He stood, and she tensed, but he only gathered more wood for the fire, building it up against the cold that came with prairie darkness. Then he pulled a buffalo robe from his pack, tossed it to her side of the fire, and settled back on his own side with a blanket. The message was clear: the fire stays between us. You're safe. Maggie wrapped herself in the buffalo robe, which smelled of smoke and grass and something wild. She meant to stay awake, alert, but exhaustion pulled at her. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Mattow's profile against the stars, keeping watch. She woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute she'd grown used to. Mattow was heating it in a battered pot, along with some kind of flatbread on a stone. Morning light filtered through the cottonwoods, and birds sang overhead. He handed her a tin cup without ceremony. The coffee was black, bitter, perfect. They ate the bread, which tasted of corn and herbs, while the sun climbed higher. Then he stood, kicked dirt over the fire, and began packing. She watched, uncertain, until he pointed north and said, "Come." I need to go to the settlement," she said. "South." He shook his head. "No settlement. South." He made a gesture that clearly meant nothing. Then again, pointing north, "My people, safe." Go with him to his camp. The idea was insane, but what was her alternative? Wander the prairie until she died of thirst or exposure. He saw her hesitation, seemed to consider. Then he pointed to her feet, still wrapped in the salve-soaked bandages, made walking motions with his fingers, then shook his head. "You can't walk far on those feet." He pointed to himself, to her, then north, pointed to the sun, held up 2 fingers, 2 days to his camp, then made a sweeping gesture toward the horizon. From there, anywhere you want to go. It was the best offer she was likely to get. Maybe the only offer. "All right," she said quietly. "Yes, I'll come." He nodded as if he'd expected nothing else, then went to gather his horse, a painted mare grazing nearby, watching him move with casual efficiency through this landscape that had nearly killed her. Maggie realized something. She'd left everything behind, her name, her past, her plans. The wagon had abandoned her. The trail had disappeared, and she was following a stranger into the unknown. The girl who'd fled Pennsylvania in terror was gone, lost somewhere on the prairie. Who she'd become, she didn't yet know. But as Mattow helped her onto the horse, his hands careful of her injured feet, she felt something she hadn't expected, not fear, but possibility. The West was supposed to be where people went to disappear, to become someone new. Maybe Buck Harrigan had done her a favor after all. They rode north as the sun climbed higher, the grassland stretching endlessly ahead. Behind them, her footprints in the dust were already fading, erased by the constant prairie wind. Soon it would be as if Margaret Caldwell had never passed this way at all. Only Maggie remained, riding toward a future as vast and uncertain as the Dakota sky. The Lakota camp appeared like a mirage rising from the grassland, a cluster of buffalo-hide teepees arranged in a rough circle. Smoke drifting from cooking fires, horses grazing nearby. Children's laughter carried on the wind, mixing with the barking of dogs and the steady rhythm of someone pounding dried corn. Maggie's stomach tightened. For 2 days she'd ridden behind Mattow on his painted mare, stopping only to rest and water the horse. He'd been patient with her inexperience, steadying her when she swayed, teaching her to move with the animal rather than fight it. But now, faced with an entire camp of his people, the fear she'd suppressed came rushing back. "Many eyes," Maddo said quietly, feeling her tense. "No fear. You are with me." The dogs reached them first, lean, wolfish creatures that circled and sniffed until Maddo spoke sharply in Lakota. Then came the children, running alongside the horse, pointing at Maggie's pale skin and tangled hair. Their curiosity held no malice, but she felt exposed, foreign in a way she'd never experienced. An older man emerged from the largest teepee, 60 perhaps, with iron-gray braids and a face mapped with years of sun and wind. His eyes were the same deep brown as Maddo's, and Maggie guessed this was family even before Maddo dismounted and touched the man's shoulder in greeting. "8," Maddo said. "Father." What followed was a rapid exchange in Lakota, gestures toward Maggie, questioning looks. She caught her name once or twice, but understood nothing else. Other adults gathered, women with babies on cradle boards, men who'd been working on weapons or tools, all watching her. Finally, the older man, Maddo's father, stepped forward. His English was more limited than his son's, but his meaning was clear. "You hurt." She showed him her bandaged feet, and he nodded, pointed to a woman standing nearby, middle-aged, with kind eyes and work-strong hands. "She help, good medicine." The woman, who introduced herself as Winona, led Maggie to a smaller teepee, inside. It was surprisingly warm and comfortable buffalo robes on the ground, parfleche bags hanging from the poles, a small fire in the center with smoke rising through the top opening. It smelled of sage, leather, and something cooking in a pot. Winona gestured for Maggie to sit, then carefully unwrapped her feet. She made disapproving sounds at the state of them, then began cleaning the wounds with warm water steeped in herbs. Her touch was gentle but thorough. "You," Winona said, searching for English words. "Stay, heal." She pointed to Maggie's feet, held up 5 fingers. 5 days. No walk. 5 days? Maggie nodded, though the thought of staying that long among strangers made her nervous. But what choice did she have? Her feet were raw meat. She couldn't walk a mile, let alone to the nearest white settlement. Winona produced new moccasins, soft deerskin that would cushion her healing feet. Then clothing, a simple hide dress and leggings. Maggie's calico was travel-stained and torn. She accepted the new clothes gratefully, though the cut and feel were strange. Over the next days, she learned the rhythm of camp life. Morning meant water hauling from the creek work for women and girls. She discovered, even with hurt feet, she could help by sorting berries or grinding corn with a stone pestle. The women were patient teachers, showing her through gestures and repeated words how to scrape hide, how to tell edible roots from poison ones, how to bank a fire to last the night. The children lost their shyness quickly. A girl of perhaps 10, who called herself Little Bird in carefully pronounced English, appointed herself Maggie's guide. She taught her simple Lakota words: Minnie for water, Thate for wind, Waste for good. In return, Maggie told stories, fairy tales half remembered from childhood, adventures from the dime novels she'd read back east. The children didn't need to understand every word. Her gestures and voices made them laugh. Maddo kept his distance at first, busy with hunting and scouting. But in the evenings, he'd find her by Winona's fire. He'd correct her pronunciation of Lakota words, teaching her practical phrases, le maza. He'd say, holding up a knife, "This is a knife. Ohini king hitokiahe, where is the water?" "Why do you speak English?" she asked one evening, after stumbling through a particularly difficult phrase. "Trading post school," he said. "When I was boy, missionaries." His expression suggested it wasn't a happy memory. Learn their words, understand their tricks. She wanted to ask more, but something in his face warned her off. Instead, she said, "Thank you for helping me, for bringing me here." He shrugged. "Prairie kills the foolish. You were not ready to die." It was hardly poetry, but something about his matter-of-fact kindness touched her. In her world, her former world, men's kindness always came with a price, but Maddo asked for nothing, expected nothing. He'd helped her because she needed help. Simple as that. As her feet healed, her duties expanded. Winona taught her to tan hide brutal, smelly work that left her arms aching and her clothes stained. But there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing the stiff skin become soft and workable under her hands. She learned to make pemmican, pounding dried meat with berries and fat until it formed a dense, nutritious mass that would keep for months. The work was hard but honest. No one asked about her past, why she was alone on the prairie. They accepted her presence as they might accept a stray dog that proved useful, fed, sheltered, given purpose, but not interrogated. Still, there were tensions. A younger woman named Dakota made her disapproval clear, muttering when Maggie passed, turning away when she tried to help with communal tasks. Some of the men watched her with suspicious eyes, especially when she talked with Maddo. "She thinks you bring trouble," Little Bird explained one day, with the brutal honesty of children. White people always bring trouble. Maggie couldn't argue with that. History was on Dakota's side. The turning point came during her second week. A hunting party returned with news that made the camp buzz with anxious energy. Soldiers had been seen 2 days' ride south, making camp near the old trading post. They weren't headed this way, yet, but their presence cast a shadow over everything. That night, Maggie found herself unable to sleep. The teepee felt too close, the air too thick. She slipped outside, hoping the night air would calm her nerves. Maddo sat by the central fire, keeping watch. He glanced up as she approached, gestured to a spot near him. They sat in companionable silence, watching sparks rise toward the stars. "The soldiers," she said finally. "Are they looking for your people?" "Always looking," he said. "We are hostiles because we will not go to their reservation, will not become farmers, will not send our children to their schools." She thought of her own flight, her own refusal to accept the life others had planned for her. "I understand." He studied her face in the firelight. "Do you—" "My step-uncle," she said slowly, "wanted to. He said I owed him, after my father died. Said I had to work off the debt, but the work he wanted." She stopped, unable to voice it even now. "I ran, took what money I could find and ran. He's probably still looking for me." Maddo was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Running is not shame. Sometimes running is wisdom. But I can't run forever." "No," he agreed, "but you can choose where to stop." The next morning brought a test. 3 white men rode into camp, not soldiers, but traders, rough-looking men with calculating eyes and hands that strayed too near their weapons. They wanted to trade for horses, they said, but their gazes lingered on the women, the layout of the camp, the number of warriors. Maggie's instinct was to hide, but Winona grabbed her arm. "You talk," she said urgently. "Your words. Make them go." Suddenly, Maggie understood. Her presence, a white woman, clearly unharmed, dressed in native clothing by choice, complicated their narrative. She couldn't hide. She had to be visible. She walked to where the men sat their horses, head high despite her racing heart. "Gentlemen," she said in her most cultured Eastern accent, "how may we assist you?" They stared. One, bearded, with cold gray eyes. Recovered first. Well, a white woman. "You a captive here, Miss—" "I am a guest," she said firmly. "These people showed me Christian charity when I was abandoned on the prairie. I stay of my own free will." "That's so." The bearded man's eyes narrowed. "And what's your name? Miss, where are your people?" Her mouth went dry, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "My name is Margaret Coleman." She lied smoothly. "I was traveling to the Black Hills to take a teaching position when our wagon broke down. These kind people have been nursing me back to health." "Coleman," he repeated. as if tasting the name. Haven't heard of any missing teachers? Perhaps you don't frequent the right circles, she said coolly. Now, did you gentlemen come to trade, or merely to interrogate me? The insult landed. The bearded man's face darkened, but one of his companions, older, with a trader's instinct for avoiding trouble, spoke up. We came to trade. No offense meant, miss. The trading was brief and tense. The Lakota men offered only a few furs, nothing of real value. The message was clear. We have nothing you want. Move along. The traders left with muttered curses and backward glances. But they left. That night, there was a feast in Maggie's honor. Nothing elaborate. The camp's resources were carefully managed, but fresh venison, fry bread, and a pudding made from wild berries. Even Dakota nodded to her. A grudging acceptance. You spoke well, Maddow said, sitting beside her as the celebration wound down. Quick thoughts. Good lies. I've had practice, she admitted. The name Coleman, not your true name. She hesitated, then shook her head. Caldwell, Margaret Caldwell. But that girl, she died on the prairie. I don't know who I am now. Names can change. He said, I was once called Igmu Sapa Black Cougar, but a bear saved my life when I was young hunter. So I became Matho Sapa Black Bear. The bear knew me better than I knew myself. What will I become? She asked, half joking. He was quiet, considering. Then, Wichapi Wastewing, Star Woman. You fell from the sky into our lives. Star Woman. It sounded like something from the fairy tales she told the children. But looking around the camp, at Winona mending clothes by firelight, at Little Bird asleep against her mother's side, at the vast prairie sky above, she thought maybe fairy tales weren't so impossible after all. Her feet had healed enough to walk without pain. Soon, she'd have to decide continue west to some uncertain future, or stay with these people who'd taken her in without questions or judgment. The choice should have been obvious. She was white, educated. From a world of brick houses and printed books, this was temporary shelter. Nothing more. But watching Maddow bank the fire for the night, seeing the careful way he ensured everyone was safe before taking his own rest, she wondered if she'd already chosen without realizing it. The prairie winds sang through the camp, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Whatever came next, Margaret Caldwell was gone. In her place sat a woman without a clear past or future, but with something she'd never had before a present moment where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, she was Star Woman. And that was enough. The first snow came early that year, dusting the prairie like flour on a kitchen table. Maggie Star Woman, as the children now called her, woke to find the world transformed. 6 weeks had passed since Maddow brought her to the camp, and autumn was surrendering to winter with unseasonable haste. She emerged from Winona's teepee to find the camp buzzing with preparation. Winter meant movement, following the buffalo herd south, finding sheltered valleys where the wind wouldn't cut through the teepee walls like knives. Much work today, Winona said, handing her a parfleche bag. Pack tomorrow, maybe next day. We move. Maggie had learned enough Lakota to understand most conversations now, though speaking still came haltingly. She helped the women dismantle the drying racks, pack the preserved meat, sort through belongings to decide what would make the journey. Everything had to be portable, practical. The luxury of keeping sentimental items was one more thing she'd left behind in the East. Maddow found her struggling to fold a heavy buffalo hide. Without a word, he took one end, showing her how to fold it properly so it would lie flat on the travois. His hands brushed hers in the process, and she felt that touch for hours afterward. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully. He still kept the respectful distance their different worlds demanded, but she caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. And she watched him too, the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. How gentle he was with the children despite his warrior's bearing. the way firelight played across his features during evening stories. "Your people," he said as they worked. "They will search for you." It wasn't a question. She'd been expecting this conversation. "My step-uncle might," she admitted, "but he has no legal claim on me. I'm of age, unmarried, free to make my own choices." "White man's law is strange," Maddow observed. "Says you are free, but sends men with guns when you act free." She couldn't argue with that either. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors, a small party of cavalry soldiers, led by a young lieutenant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were checking on the roaming bands, he explained, ensuring everyone was peaceful. Maggie's heart hammered as she recognized one of the men, Sergeant Walsh, who'd been stationed near her hometown before being transferred west. If he recognized her. But Walsh's eyes passed over her without recognition. The native dress, her sun-darkened skin, her hair now worn in braids, she'd become invisible to white eyes expecting to see a white woman. "No trouble here," the lieutenant was saying to Chief Dakota Maddow's father. She'd learned. "But there's been talk. White woman gone missing from a wagon train. Some say Indians took her." "No taking," the chief replied with dignity. "We trade fair, live peaceful." The lieutenant's gaze swept the camp again, lingering on the women. Maggie kept her head down, continued scraping the hide she was working. "Just another squaw," his dismissive glance said. They left after extracting promises that the band would stay away from the settlements, but their visit cast a shadow over the camp. That night, the council met late into the hours, voices rising and falling in debate. "They want to know about you," Little Bird reported. "Ever the spy. Dakota says you bring danger. Others say you proved yourself with the traders. Maddow speaks for you." "What does he say?" The girl's face scrunched in concentration. He says the spirit sent you, that you have medicine we need." She paused. "I don't understand all the words. Old words." Neither did Maggie, but she understood enough. Maddow was defending her right to stay, invoking spiritual reasons that carried weight with the elders. It was a risk. If she proved false, it would damage his standing. The next day, while the debate continued, news arrived that changed everything. A writer from another band brought word there were papers posted in Deadwood, offering a reward for information about Margaret Caldwell, age 20, fled from Pennsylvania after suspicious circumstances surrounding her father's death. Her step-uncle, Samuel Morrison, claimed she'd stolen money and jewelry before setting fire to the family barn. "Lies," Maggie said flatly when Maddow translated. "All lies. He started that fire himself, drunk and careless with a lantern. Father tried to save the horses." She stopped, unable to continue. The memory was too raw, the screaming of trapped animals, her father's silhouette against the flames, the beam falling, and Samuel, standing outside in his nightshirt, watching it all with those cold eyes before turning them on her. "I know lies from truth," Maddow said quietly. "But papers make lies powerful." That night, she made her decision. She found Chief Dakota by his fire, Maddow beside him to translate. "I'll leave," she said. "Tomorrow, when you move camp, point me to the nearest settlement. And I'll go. I won't bring trouble to your people." The chief studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke. Maddow translating. "Trouble comes whether we invite it or not. The question is, are you worth the trouble you bring?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I can work, I can learn, but I'm not your people. I don't have the right to ask for protection." "Rights," the chief mused. "Another white word we don't understand. We protect those who are ours. The question is, are you ours?" He dismissed her without answering, leaving her more confused than ever. The camp moved at dawn, a practiced choreography of dismantling and packing. Maggie worked alongside Winona, trying not to think about which direction she'd be walking when they were done. But when the travois were loaded and the horses ready, Winona handed her a lead rope. "You lead pack horses," she said firmly. "Long walk today." No one pointed her toward a settlement. No one handed her supplies for a solitary journey. The band moved south along an ancient trail, and Maggie moved with them, leading 3 horses loaded with household goods. Maddo rode outrider, scouting ahead and along their flanks. When he passed close, he caught her eye and nodded once. The decision had been made, with or without her input. She was theirs now, for better or worse. The journey took 4 days. They followed creek beds and valleys, paths invisible to untrained eyes but worn smooth by generations of passage. At night, the teepees went up with practiced efficiency, and life resumed as if they'd never moved. On the 3rd night, camped in a sheltered valley with good water and windbreak, Maddo sought her out. She was helping Little Bird with her English letters, drawing in the dirt with a stick. "Tomorrow," he said, "we reach winter camp. My mother's people are there. Many bands together for the cold months. Will they accept me?" "Some will, some won't." He was always honest with her, never offering false comfort. "But my family speaks for you. That carries weight." "Why?" she asked. "Why do you speak for me?" "You don't know me. Not really. I could be everything those papers say." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "The bear that saved me, I was young, foolish, thought I could take its cave for shelter. It could have killed me easily. Instead, it pushed me out. Gentle, let me live." He looked at her directly. "Sometimes strength shows itself in choosing not to harm. You had chances to betray us to those soldiers, to those traitors. You didn't. That tells me who you are." "I'm nobody," she said, "just a farm girl who ran away." "No," his voice was firm. "You are Star Woman. You fell from your old life and landed here. That means something." Before she could respond, he stood and walked away, leaving her to contemplate the fire and the vast prairie darkness beyond. The winter camp sprawled along a river bend. Dozens of teepees, hundreds of people, more Indians than Maggie had ever seen in one place. Her arrival caused a stir. White women in native camps meant captives. Usually, that she walked free, led horses, worked alongside the women, made her a curiosity. Some reactions were hostile. A group of young warriors made threatening gestures until Maddo stared them down. An old woman spat at her feet and muttered what were clearly curses, but others were merely curious. And a few, those who'd heard of her standing up to the traitors, were cautiously welcoming. That first night in the big camp, there was a feast to welcome the newcomers. Maggie sat with Winona's family, trying to be invisible. But after the eating came the time for stories and news. Chief Dakota stood and began to speak, even without understanding all the words. She knew he was talking about her. He gestured to where she sat, and hundreds of eyes turned her way. Her face burned, but she kept her head up. Maddo had taught her that. Never show shame unless you've earned it. The chief's speech went on, and gradually she picked up threads. He was telling her story, but not the way she would have. In his version, she was a woman wronged by her own people, cast out for refusing dishonor. The spirits had guided her to them, he said, and she'd proved herself through work and courage. It was her story transformed into something archetypal, mythic. She wanted to protest. She was no hero, just desperate. But she understood this was how they made sense of her presence, fitting her into their understanding of the world. When the chief finished, an old man stood. He spoke at length, his tone challenging. Others joined in, a debate about her, around her, but not including her. She caught enough to understand the core question: could a white woman truly become one of them, or would she always be an outsider, a potential threat? Finally, Maddo stood. He spoke quietly, but the camp fell silent to listen. He talked about adaptation, about strength, about choosing new paths when old ones failed. Then he did something that made the entire assembly gasp. He pulled a knife from his belt and made a shallow cut on his palm. Blood welled up, dark in the firelight. Then he walked to where Maggie sat and held out his hand. "Choose," he said in English, quiet enough that only she could hear. "This means you are my responsibility. My family's. If you betray us, our honor suffers. If you stay true, our honor grows. Choose." She understood. This was more than acceptance. It was adoption. In a sense, he was offering to tie her to his family formally, making her place unquestionable, but also making himself accountable for her actions. The fire crackled. The entire camp watched. Somewhere in the darkness, a baby cried and was quickly hushed. Maggie looked at Mattow's face, serious, patient, but with something deeper in his eyes. Not possession or desire, but recognition. He saw her truly. This man who spoke of bears and spirits saw past Margaret Caldwell and Star Woman to whoever she really was underneath. She took the knife and made her own cut, pressing her bloodied palm to his. The camp erupted in noise, approval, dissent, amazement, but Maggie heard none of it. All she knew was the warmth of Mattow's hand in hers and the sense that she'd just crossed a bridge that could never be uncrossed. Later, Winona tended their cuts with her usual practical efficiency. "Foolish," she muttered, but her eyes were warm. Both foolish, but brave foolish. Maybe. That night, Maggie lay in her buffalo robes, palm throbbing, and thought about choices. Every choice led to another. A chain of decisions that had brought her from a burning barn in Pennsylvania to a Lakota winter camp. Margaret Caldwell would never have made that blood oath, but Margaret Caldwell was ash on the wind. Star Woman flexed her bandaged hand and felt the weight of belonging settle over her like a new blanket, warm but not yet familiar. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The winter would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. The spring might bring Samuel Morrison or soldiers or worse. But tonight, she was part of something larger than herself. The wind sang through the camp, and she listened to it with new ears. It sounded like home. The spring moon hung low over the winter camp when the riders arrived. Maggie was scraping buffalo hide with Winona and the other women, her hands now calloused and sure with the work. 6 months had passed since her blood oath with Mattow. 6 months of learning, adapting, becoming more Star Woman than Margaret Caldwell with each passing day. She heard the horses before she saw them. Too many hoofbeats for a hunting party. Too organized for traders. Her stomach clenched with familiar dread. "Soldiers," Little Bird whispered, appearing at her elbow as she always did when something interesting happened. "Many soldiers, and white men in town clothes." Maggie set down her scraping tool carefully. Around her, the other women continued working, but their movements had become deliberate, watchful. Children were quietly gathered and moved toward the center of camp. The delegation stopped at the camp's edge. Following protocol, Chief Dakota and several warriors went to meet them, including Mattow. Maggie could see him from where she sat, his posture relaxed but ready, hand casual near his knife. One of the townsmen, a thin fellow in a dusty black suit, pulled out a paper and began reading in a loud, official voice that carried across the camp. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Dakota and the United States government, I am seeking one Margaret Caldwell, age 20, wanted for questioning regarding the death of Jonathan Caldwell and destruction of property belonging to Samuel Morrison." The blood drained from Maggie's face. Winona's hand found hers, squeezing tight. The man continued reading, details about her appearance, the reward offered, the likelihood that she'd been taken captive by Indians. Then he looked up, scanning the camp with sharp eyes. "We have reliable information that this woman was seen with your band," he announced. "The law requires you to surrender her immediately. Harboring a fugitive is a serious crime." Chief Dakota responded through an interpreter, a mixed-blood scout who looked uncomfortable with his role. "We have no captives here. All who stay with us choose to stay." "Then you won't mind if we search the camp," the official said. It wasn't a question. The chief's face remained impassive, but Maggie saw the tension in his shoulders. To refuse would bring violence. To agree would violate every principle of sovereignty and dignity. Maddow spoke up, his English clear and challenging. You have papers. We respect papers. Show us proof this woman exists, that she is here. The official's face reddened. Boy, I don't need to prove anything to you. I am not boy. Maddow cut him off. I am warrior of this band. You come to our camp, make demands. We ask for respect, nothing more. Behind the official, Maggie noticed another figure, a man who'd stayed mounted, watching everything from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Something about his stillness made her skin crawl, as if sensing her attention. He looked up, and her heart stopped. Samuel Morrison, her step-uncle. He'd aged in the months since she'd seen him, more gray in his beard, deeper lines around his cold eyes, but the cruel set of his mouth remained unchanged. There, he said, pointing directly at her. That's her, dressed like a savage. But that's Margaret. Every eye in the camp turned to her. Maggie stood slowly, chin raised, forcing herself to meet Samuel's gaze without flinching. I don't know this man, she said, loud enough for all to hear. Samuel's laugh was harsh. Don't know me, girl. I raised you for 3 years after your mama died. Fed you, clothed you, gave you a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me, burning down my barn, stealing my money, running off like a thief in the night. Liar, she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. You killed my father. You were drunk, knocked over a lantern, and left him to die in the flames. Then you tried to... She stopped, unable to voice what he'd tried to do even now. I took nothing that wasn't mine. The law says different. The official interrupted. Miss Caldwell, you need to come with us. You'll get a fair hearing before a judge. Whose judge? Maddow asked. Whose law she has committed no crimes here? She's wanted for murder and theft, Samuel said. That's crimes anywhere. The delegation had dismounted now, soldiers spreading out slightly, not quite surrounding the camp, but the threat was clear. Maggie counted 20 men, all armed. The camp had more warriors, but also women, children, elders who'd be caught in any violence. Chief Dakota held up a hand for silence. When he spoke, the interpreter translated, This woman came to us freely. She has lived as one of us, worked beside us, proven herself. By our law, she is under our protection. Your law doesn't supersede federal law, the official said. If you don't surrender her voluntarily, we'll have no choice but to take her by force. Try, Maddow said softly, and several younger warriors moved to flank him. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Maggie could feel the violence brewing, could almost taste it in the air, and she knew, had known from the moment she saw Samuel, what she had to do. Wait, she said, stepping forward. I'll come. No! The word burst from multiple throats. Winona, Little Bird, several others who'd become friends. But Maddow's was loudest, his eyes blazing with something that might have been betrayal. She met his gaze steadily. I won't have blood spilled for me, not your blood, not theirs. She turned to the official. I'll come freely, but I have conditions. Samuel started to speak, but the official silenced him with a gesture. What conditions? I want safe passage for this band. No retaliation, no harassment. Your word, in writing, that my presence here won't be used against them. The official considered, I can agree to that. And I want a proper hearing, not in some mining camp, but in a real court, with a real judge and a chance to speak my truth. That can be arranged. Maggie, no, Maddow said in Lakota, forgetting himself. You don't understand. He will not keep his word. They never do. I know, she replied in the same language, surprising him. But I also know staying means death for some of you. I won't have that weight on my spirit. She turned to Winona, pulled off the bone necklace she'd been given at her adoption ceremony. Hold this for me. she said. "Until I return." Winona's eyes filled with tears, but she took the necklace. Maggie walked to where her few original possessions were stored. The canvas satchel was worn now, stained with prairie dust and smoke. But inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the one thing she'd kept from her old life, her mother's wooden comb. She tucked it inside her dress, then faced the delegation. "I'm ready." They bound her hands. "Procedure," the official said apologetically, and helped her mount a spare horse. As the party prepared to leave, Maddow approached Samuel's horse. "You are her family?" he asked. Samuel sneered. "What's it to you, boy?" "A man who harms his family has no honor," Maddow said calmly. "No honor means no protection from the spirits. They see everything. Remember that." Samuel's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Maddow said. "Warning. The prairie has many dangers for men without honor." He turned away without another word, but Maggie saw him exchange looks with several warriors. They would follow, she realized. At a distance, unseen. But they would follow. As the party rode out, the entire camp gathered to watch. No one waved or called out. That wasn't their way, but she felt their presence like a physical thing, a weight of belonging that made leaving even harder. Little Bird broke protocol, running alongside Maggie's horse for a few yards. "You come back," she said fiercely. "You are Star Woman. Star Woman comes back." Then they were beyond the camp, riding north toward whatever passed for civilization out here. Maggie didn't look back. Looking back would have broken her resolve, and she needed every ounce of strength for what lay ahead. They made camp at sunset, 20 miles from the winter camp. The soldiers were professional but not unkind, offering her food and ensuring her bonds weren't too tight. Samuel kept his distance, but she felt his eyes on her constantly. The official, who'd introduced himself as Marcus Thornton, Territorial Marshal, approached her as she sat by the fire. "Miss Caldwell," he said, settling beside her with a grunt. "I need to understand something. Those Indians back there, they were ready to fight for you, die for you, even. That's not normal for a captive." "I wasn't a captive," she said simply. "I was family." "But you're white, Christian, civilized. How could you choose to live like that?" She looked at him, really looked, saw a man trying to make sense of something that didn't fit his worldview. "Marshal Thornton, have you ever been completely alone? No family, no friends, no one who cares if you live or die?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Can't say I have. They took me in when I had nothing, fed me when I was hungry, taught me when I was ignorant, protected me when I was threatened." She met his eyes. "Tell me, Marshal, is that savagery or civilization?" He had no answer. Later, when the camp settled for the night, Samuel finally approached. The guards were distant enough to give the illusion of privacy, but close enough to intervene if needed. "You've caused me considerable trouble," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Cost me money, reputation, time." "You caused yourself trouble," she replied. "I just refused to pay for it." His hand moved as if to strike her, then remembered the watching guards. "You always were too smart for your own good, just like your mother. Thought she was better than everyone else, too." "Don't speak of her," Maggie warned. "I'll speak of whoever I damn well please." He leaned closer, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think you're going to waltz into some courtroom and tell your little story? Think again. I've got witnesses who'll swear you started that fire. Respected men who'll testify to your unstable nature, your wild behavior." "Lies," she said. "Truth is what the judge believes," Samuel said with satisfaction. "And judges tend to believe respectable businessmen over hysterical girls who run off to live with savages." He stood, brushing dust from his coat. "Enjoy your last days of freedom, Margaret. Once we reach Fort Pierre, you'll be lucky if they don't hang you." But as he walked away, Maggie allowed herself a small smile. He thought he'd won, thought he had her trapped. He didn't know about the papers in her satchel, the ones she'd found hidden in his desk the night of the fire, before everything went to hell. Bills of sale that didn't match his ledgers, letters discussing moving merchandise that wasn't listed in any legal inventory. Samuel Morrison had secrets, and now, finally, she might have a chance to expose them. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear prairie sky. Somewhere to the south, her adopted family slept in their teepees, somewhere in the darkness. She was certain. Maddow kept watch. She wasn't alone, even bound and guarded, heading toward an uncertain fate. She wasn't alone. Star Woman had people who claimed her, who would remember her, who would fight for her in their own way. Margaret Caldwell had been a frightened girl, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a dead father's memory. Star Woman was different, stronger, clearer, carrying the courage of two worlds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, under the familiar stars, she prepared for the battle ahead, not with weapons or violence, but with truth, cunning, and the unshakable knowledge that she had chosen her path and would see it through. The coyotes sang in the distance, and she listened with prairie-trained ears. Their song spoke of hunt and home, of family bonds and fierce loyalty. She understood them perfectly. The autumn wind carried the scent of coming winter as Maggie stood at the edge of the valley, watching Maddow fell another pine for their cabin. 3 months had passed since the confrontation at Fort Pierre, 3 months since her world had shifted yet again. The trial had been a sensation. Samuel's confident smirk had faded when she'd produced his hidden papers, documentation of his illegal activities that went far beyond what even she had suspected. The judge, a fair man despite her fears, had listened to her testimony with growing concern. When Samuel's respectable witnesses crumbled under questioning, their stories contradicting each other, the truth had emerged like spring water through rock. She was free. Samuel faced his own charges now, his property seized, his reputation destroyed. But freedom had felt hollow standing outside that courtroom, with nowhere to go and winter approaching. Then she'd seen him, Maddow, waiting with 2 horses at the edge of town, as she'd somehow known he would be. The band moved to winter grounds. He'd said simply, "But I waited." Now, watching him work, she marveled at how much had changed. They'd returned to find the band had already relocated, but Maddow had brought her here instead, to this sheltered valley his father had shown him years ago. Perfect for building a permanent shelter. "Hand me the axe," he called, and she passed it to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. These small touches had become more frequent, more lingering, as they worked side by side. They'd been building for 2 weeks now. The cabin was small but solid, tucked against a rock face that would shield it from the worst winter winds. Maddow had taught her to notch logs, to fill gaps with a mixture of mud and grass that would harden like cement. Her hands, already calloused from hide work, developed new blisters that became new calluses. "Why here?" she'd asked on the first day. "Why not with a band?" "Sometimes," he'd said, fitting a log into place. "A man needs his own lodge, his own fire, when he's thinking of changes." She'd understood then what he wasn't quite saying. Among his people, a man who wanted to marry prepared a home first, proved he could provide, but this was different. This was a white woman's cabin as much as a Lakota lodge, with a wooden floor and windows they'd traded for in the nearest settlement. They worked mostly in comfortable silence, but sometimes Maddow would tell stories about the seasons in this valley, the best hunting spots, where the sweetest berries grew. He was mapping out a life for her. She realized, showing her how to live on this land as something between 2 worlds. As the sun began to set, they stood back to survey their progress. The walls were complete, the roof beams in place. Tomorrow they'd start on the roofing cedar shakes that would shed rain and snow. "Hungry?" Maddow asked, and she nodded. They'd developed an easy routine. He hunted and fished. She prepared meals and preserved meat for winter. It was a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. They sat by their evening fire, sharing venison stew and the flat bread she'd learned to make from Winona. The nights were getting colder, and she pulled her blanket closer. "Your step-uncle," Maddow said suddenly. "The papers say he will go to prison." Yes. She'd received word through Marshal Thornton, who'd turned out to be a decent man after all. 5 to 10 years, if convicted. His associates are turning against him to save themselves. You could claim his property as family. She shook her head. "I want nothing of his. Let it all rot." They fell silent again, watching sparks rise toward the stars. Then Maddow stood, adding more wood to the fire. When he sat back down, it was closer to her than before. "Maggie," he said, using her white name as he did when something was important. "I have been thinking." Her heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. About you, about us, about what comes next." He turned to face her fully, firelight dancing across his serious features. "You are free now. Free to go anywhere. Be anyone. You could return east, start fresh. You could go to California, to the cities." "Is that what you want?" she asked. "For me to leave?" "No." The word came quick and fierce. "But I want you to choose with clear eyes. Life here." He gestured at the half-built cabin, the wild valley beyond. "It will always be hard. You will always be between worlds. Some whites will see you as traitor. Some of my people will never fully accept you. Your children." He stopped, color rising in his face. "Our children," she corrected softly, and watched his eyes widen. "That is what we're discussing, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "A man should not speak of such things until he has more to offer. The cabin is not finished. I have only 2 horses, a few furs for trade, by my people's measure. I am not yet wealthy enough to take a wife. And by my people's measure, by your people's measure, I am nothing. No proper job, no bank account, no family name that matters in your world." She set down her bowl and turned to face him fully. "Maddow, look at me." When he did, she continued, "Do you really think I care about any of that after everything? You should care. You deserve—" "I deserve," she interrupted, "to make my own choices. And I choose this. I choose you, if you'll have me." The words hung between them like suspended stars. Then Maddow reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. His hand cupped her cheek, work rough and gentle. "We choppy waist wing," he murmured. "My star woman, I would have you as my wife, my partner, mother of my children, if you would have me." Instead of answering with words, she leaned into his touch. Their lips met the first time. After all these months of careful distance, the kiss was tender, almost reverent, full of promise and patience. When they parted, she was trembling, but not from cold. "Maddow," she whispered, and he understood. Rising, he led her into the half-finished cabin, where they'd laid buffalo robes over fresh pine boughs. The moon cast silver light through the gaps where windows would be. In that light, they came together with a hunger born of long restraint. His hands traced her face, her shoulders, the curve of her waist, mapping her like new territory, with the same careful attention he gave to everything precious. "Touch me," she breathed against his neck. "Everywhere, more." His laugh was soft, wondering. "Impatient," he teased, but his hands obeyed, roaming her body with increasing confidence as she arched beneath his touch. "Only you," he whispered as clothing fell away, as skin met skin. "Only ever you." They moved together in the ancient rhythm, 2 people becoming one, creating their own ceremony far from any church or sacred ground. She'd been told such things were duty, endurance, a wife's burden, but this was joy. was choosing, was coming home. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers combed through her hair, now loose and wild around her shoulders. "In the morning," he said quietly, "I should speak to my father, make things proper." "Proper?" she laughed. "After this?" "Especially after this." His arms tightened around her. "You are not some secret thing. You will be my wife before both worlds, both laws." "That's complicated," she pointed out. "Legal marriage means going to a town, finding a judge or preacher who'll marry us despite," she gestured at him, at herself, at everything they were. "Then we do both," he said simply. "My people's way and yours. Let none say we are not truly bound." She rose up on one elbow to look at him. "You'd do that stand in some courthouse, deal with the stares and whispers. I would walk through fire for you," he said, matter of fact. "A courthouse is nothing." They talked long into the night, planning. The cabin to finish before true winter. A trip to the band for the Lakota ceremony. Finding a town where someone would marry them legally. Building a life that honored both their worlds while being fully neither. "Regrets?" he asked as dawn light began to filter through. "No," she said, certain as bedrock. "I was born for this life. It just took me 20 years to find it." They rose with the sun, returning to work with new purpose. Every log placed was a promise, every board a commitment. As Maggie mixed mortar for the chimney, she sang an old hymn from childhood, the notes floating across the valley. Maddow smiled, adding his own voice in Lakota, creating harmony she'd never heard in any church. By evening, the roof frame was complete. They stood together, dirty and exhausted and happy, surveying their work. "Home," Maggie said, testing the word. "Abi." Maddow agreed in Lakota, then, teaching as always, our theepi. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 3 riders appeared at the valley's entrance. Winona, Little Bird, and Dakota. They brought supplies, dried meat, wild rice, the bone necklace Maggie had left behind. "Heard you were building," Dakota said with an almost smile. "Came to see this lodge that keeps my son from hunting." But Winona went straight to Maggie, studying her face with knowing eyes. Whatever she saw there made her nod with satisfaction. "Good," she said simply. "It is good." They stayed 2 days, helping with the roof, sharing news from the band. When they left, Winona pressed a small pouch into Maggie's hands. "For the ceremony," she said, "when you are ready." Inside were beads, porcupine quills, and everything needed to decorate a wedding dress. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Daughter," Winona said, the first time she'd used that word, "you come home now, both homes," as their visitors rode away. Maddow pulled Maggie close. "See," he said, "not all will reject us. Our children will have grandmothers," she realized. "Families, stories from both worlds." "The best of both," he agreed. "Like their mother." That night, first snow began to fall, light flakes that dusted the valley in pristine white, from inside their nearly complete cabin, warm by their new fireplace. They watched winter arrive. "By spring," Maddow said, hand resting on her still flat belly with gentle speculation, "everything will be different." "Everything is already different," Maggie corrected, covering his hand with hers. Outside, the snow fell harder, beginning to reshape the familiar valley into something new. But inside, by their fire, in their home built by 4 hands and 2 hearts, Star Woman and Black Bear created their own warm world. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, challenging, but chosen. And that, Maggie thought as sleep took her, made all the difference. The April thaw had turned the trail to mud when the riders appeared on the ridge above their valley. Maggie looked up from the garden she was planting, one hand moving instinctively to her swollen belly. 6 months along now, and the baby was active, especially in the mornings. Maddo emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand but not raised. They'd grown cautious over the winter, as news of their unconventional marriage had spread to nearby settlements. Some folks were merely curious, others were less benign. 5 riders, he said quietly. White men, one in a suit. Maggie's heart sank. Men in suits meant law or business, neither typically good news for them. She wiped her muddy hands on her apron, a strange garment that mixed calico with decorated hide, much like everything else in their blended life. As the riders descended into the valley, the lead man became visible, Marshal Thornton, his badge glinting in the spring sun. Maggie relaxed slightly. Thornton had been fair during her trial, even helpful afterward. Mrs. Black Bear, he called out as he approached, using the name from their legal marriage certificate. They'd found a justice of the peace in a small town 50 miles north, a man more interested in their $2 fee than their different races. Mr. Black Bear. Hope I'm not interrupting. Marshal, Maggie greeted him, straightening with difficulty. What brings you out here? Thornton dismounted, his men remaining on their horses. His expression was troubled. I'm afraid it's not a social call. There's been developments. Maddo moved closer to Maggie, protective but not threatening. What developments? Samuel Morrison was released from prison last month. Some technicality with the evidence. Lawyers from back east getting involved. Thornton removed his hat, worried it between his hands. He's been making noise about reclaiming what's his, including, he says, his legal ward. I'm not his ward, Maggie said sharply. I'm 21, married, and carrying a child. He has no claim on me. I know that. Judge knows that. But Morrison's got himself a lawyer who's arguing otherwise. Says your marriage isn't valid. That you were coerced by savages, pardon the language. That's his words, not mine. He's got witnesses willing to testify they saw you captive in the Lakota camp. Lies, Maddo said flatly. Course they are, but lies told often enough, with enough money behind them. Thornton shrugged helplessly. He's also claiming rights to this land. Says it was purchased with money you stole from him. Maggie laughed, but there was no humor in it. This land wasn't purchased. It was granted to Maddo's family by treaty, registered properly. We built on his land, not mine. I've seen the papers. I know it's legal. But Morrison's stirring up folks in town, talking about white women degrading themselves, about the need to rescue you from your situation. He glanced meaningfully at her belly. The child complicates things. There's some saying no white woman would willingly. That is, they're claiming you must be under some Indian influence. What do you want us to do? Maddo asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Nothing. For now. I wanted to warn you. Is all. Morrison's planning something, though I don't know what yet. He's got support from some of the more traditional folks in the settlements. People who don't like the idea of mixed marriages, mixed children. He remounted his horse, then paused. You might want to visit the band, stay there a while. Safety in numbers and all that. After the marshal left, Maggie and Maddo stood in their garden, processing this news. The seedlings she'd been planting corn, beans, squash in the traditional Three Sisters pattern Winona had taught her seemed suddenly fragile. We could leave, she said quietly. Go further west, where no one knows us. No. Maddo's response was immediate. We run from nothing. This is our home. But the baby will be born on the land of their ancestors, both ancestors. He touched her belly gently, feeling the child move. We stand. We fight if we must. 3 days later, they had visitors of a different sort, a small party from the band, led by Chief Dakota himself. The old chief had aged visibly over the winter, but his eyes were still sharp as he surveyed their homestead. My son, he said formally in Lakota. "We have heard of troubles coming." They gathered in the cabin, now cozy with furniture Maddo had built and textiles Maggie had woven. The conversation flowed between English and Lakota, with Maggie following most of it now. "This Morrison," the chief said. "He gathers men with poisoned hearts. They speak of driving out all mixed families, of purifying the territory." "Let them come," one of the younger warriors said hotly. "We will show them." "No," the chief cut him off. "Violence brings only more violence. Soldiers would come. Our children would suffer." He looked at Maggie. "All our children." "What do you suggest, Father?" Maddo asked. "Be visible. Both worlds must see you living well, peacefully. Hard for Morrison to claim you need rescue when town sees you happy, free." He paused. "The spring gathering is soon. Come, bring your wife. Let all see you are truly family." The spring gathering was a massive affair. Multiple bands coming together for trade, ceremonies, and socializing. Maggie had attended smaller gatherings, but nothing like this. Hundreds of teepees spread across a vast meadow, horses everywhere, the air thick with smoke and voices. Their arrival caused the expected stir. A pregnant white woman was unusual enough, one obviously happy, healthy, and there by choice was something else entirely. They'd prepared for this. Maggie wore a dress that blended both traditions, calico bodice with beautifully beaded hide skirt, her hair in traditional braids adorned with silver pins from her mother's collection. She walked with Maddo through the camp, head high, greeting friends and facing down suspicious looks with equal grace. "See how she walks?" she heard one elder woman say. "Like she belongs here. Maybe she does." On the second day, during the women's gathering, something shifted. Maggie was helping prepare food when she suddenly gasped, hand to her belly. The baby had kicked hard, and several women noticed her discomfort. An ancient grandmother approached, hands weathered but gentle. She spoke no English, but her touch was universal as she felt Maggie's belly with experienced fingers. "Sung Kaku," she pronounced with satisfaction. "A strong one." Then, to the surrounding women, "This child will bridge worlds. I have seen it." Coming from her, it was almost prophecy. The women's attitude shifted, subtly but noticeably. By evening, Maggie found herself fully included in the gossip and work, no longer an oddity, but simply another expectant mother. The gathering was interrupted on the fourth day. A group of white men appeared at the edge of camp. Not soldiers, but civilians armed and angry. Morrison stood at their head, his face twisted with righteous fury. "Margaret Caldwell," he shouted. "I know you're here. Come out and face justice." The camp erupted in controlled chaos. Warriors moved to defensive positions while women and children withdrew to safety. But Maggie stepped forward, Maddo beside her. "I'm here, Samuel," she called out, her voice carrying clearly. "What justice do you seek? You're the one who escaped it." "You're living in sin with a savage," he spat, carrying his mongrel child. "It's an abomination before God and man." "Before whose God?" she asked. "The one who teaches love and compassion, or the one you've invented to justify your hate?" Morrison's group stirred uneasily. They'd expected to find a cowed captive, not a woman standing proud and defiant, visibly pregnant and unashamed. "You'll come with us," Morrison commanded. "The court will decide what's best for you and that." He gestured disgustedly at her belly. "No court has jurisdiction here," Chief Dakota said, stepping forward with several warriors. "This is sovereign land." Sovereign Morrison laughed ugly. "You're nothing but—" His words were cut off by the arrival of more riders. Marshal Thornton and a federal judge from the territorial capital, along with a small military escort. "Morrison!" the judge called out, his voice heavy with authority. "You're violating about 6 different laws right now. Stand down." "Judge Watson," Morrison protested. You don't understand. This woman filed a complaint about harassment. I've reviewed the case, including your fraudulent imprisonment of her and theft of her inheritance. The judge dismounted, pulling out official papers. Mr. Morrison, you're under arrest. Again. What followed was almost anticlimactic. Morrison blustered and threatened, but his supporters melted away when faced with federal authority. As the marshal's men let him off, he turned back one last time. This isn't over, he snarled at Maggie. That abomination you're carrying is a child. Judge Watson cut him off. And any further threats against Mrs. Black Bear or her family will be met with the full force of federal law. He turned to Maggie. Ma'am, I apologize for the disturbance. The territorial government recognizes your marriage and your rights. After the officials left, the gathering tried to return to normal, but the confrontation had cast a shadow. That evening, in their guest teepee, Maggie couldn't stop shaking. It won't end, she said. He'll keep coming, or others like him. Our child will face this hatred before they're even born. Maddow held her close, his hand protective over their baby. Yes, he said simply, but they will also have love. From two peoples, two worlds, they will be strong. How can you be sure? Because their mother is the strongest person I know. She walked between worlds and made them one. Our child will learn this courage. As if in response, the baby kicked again, vigorous and insistent. Despite everything, Maggie smiled. Strong indeed, she murmured. They returned to their valley after the gathering, to find their home untouched but signs that others had been there. Boot prints, horse droppings, the gate left carelessly open. A message, perhaps, or reconnaissance. We need to prepare, Maddow said grimly. They spent the next days reinforcing their position. Members of the band took turns visiting, ensuring they were never alone. Maggie continued her garden work, determined not to let fear rule her life. The three sisters grew strong in the spring sun, their intertwined growth a daily reminder of how different things could support each other. One morning, as she watered the plants, movement caught her eye. A rider approached, alone, hands visible and empty. As he got closer, she recognized him, one of Morrison's men from the confrontation, a young fellow barely out of his teens. Ma'am, he called out nervously. I come in peace. Want to talk. Maddow appeared, rifle ready, but Maggie touched his arm. Let's hear him out. The young man, Thomas, he said his name was, dismounted awkwardly. I wanted to apologize, he blurted. For being part of that mob, my PA says I got to stand with my own kind. But it ain't right. What Morrison's preaching. What changed your mind? Maggie asked gently. Saw you there, standing tall, protecting your baby. My ma did the same when PA tried to take us kids after drinking. Bravest thing I ever saw. Until you. He shuffled his feet. Morrison's wrong. Love's love, family's family. Don't matter what color. He left after warning them that Morrison, though jailed, still had supporters planning to something. What, he didn't know, but they should be careful. That night, as they lay together, the baby restless between them, Maggie thought about bridges, real bridges and metaphorical ones, the kind their child would have to build and cross. We're not just building a home, she said into the darkness. We're building a future that doesn't exist yet. It exists, Maddow corrected. Here, now, every day we live it. We make it more real. Outside, a spring storm rolled in, thunder echoing off the valley walls. But inside, they were warm, safe, together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison wasn't finished, and neither were the forces he represented. But tonight, Star Woman and Black Bear held each other and their unborn child, creating their own small world where love transcended boundaries and families could be chosen as much as born. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. Through the window, Stars appeared, brilliant and eternal. "Look," Maddo whispered. "We're choppy, stars, like you." Maggie smiled against his shoulder. Whatever came next, they would face it together. All three of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley when they came. Maggie was feeding the chickens, a recent addition to their homestead, when she heard the thunder of hooves. Not one or two riders, but many. "Maddo," she called, but he was already moving, rifle in hand, positioning himself between the cabin and the approaching threat. They came from 3 directions, 20 men, maybe more, some in worn Confederate gray, others in the rough clothes of miners and drifters. At their head rode Samuel Morrison, freed again through some legal manipulation, his face twisted with zealous fury. "Inside," Maddo ordered, but Maggie stood firm. "No, we face this together. 8 months pregnant now." She moved carefully but with determination. The baby seemed to sense the tension, shifting restlessly. Morrison reined up just outside rifle range, his men spreading out in a rough semicircle. "Last chance. Margaret," he called out. "Come willingly, and no one needs to get hurt." "The only one who'll be hurt is you if you come any closer," Maddo warned, his rifle steady. "1 man against 20? Morrison laughed. "Those aren't good odds. Savage." "He's not alone." The voice came from behind Morrison. Warriors materialized from the rocks and trees, Lakota scouts who'd been shadowing the mob since they left town. 10, 15, 20 of them, bows drawn, rifles ready. Morrison's men shifted nervously, suddenly realizing they were the ones outnumbered. "This is kidnapping," Morrison sputtered, a white woman held against her will. "Does she look kidnapped to you?" The new voice belonged to Winona, who emerged from the cabin's back entrance with several other women from the band. They'd arrived at dawn, warned by the scouts. Maggie stepped forward, one hand on her belly, the other steady at her side. "Samuel, look at me. Really look. Do I appear coerced, mistreated, unhappy?" For a moment, something flickered in Morrison's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even recognition of the truth, but it was quickly buried under layers of hatred and pride. "You're bewitched," he insisted. "Under savage influence, that thing you carry is proof of your degradation." "That thing," Maggie said coldly, "is my child. A child who will know love from 2 peoples, wisdom from 2 worlds, which is more than you ever gave me." "I gave you everything," Morrison roared. "Food, shelter, a Christian home after your father." "After you killed him," Maggie finished. "Oh yes, Samuel, I know the truth. You were stealing from him, skimming profits from the farm. He found out, confronted you. The fire wasn't an accident." Morrison's face went pale, then flushed red. "Lies, you have no proof." "Actually, she does." Marshal Thornton rode into view from the East Trail, accompanied by Judge Watson and a full cavalry unit. In his saddlebags were documents testimony from Morrison's former associates, evidence of embezzlement, and most damning, a drunken confession Morrison had made to a cellmate about dealing with Jonathan Caldwell. "Samuel Morrison," the marshal announced formally, "you're under arrest for murder, theft, and inciting violence against peaceful citizens." What happened next occurred almost too fast to follow. Morrison, seeing his world collapse, made a desperate choice. He spurred his horse forward, pistol drawn, aimed not at Maddo but at Maggie. "If I can't save you," he screamed, "I'll free you from this hell." 3 things happened simultaneously. Maddo moved, throwing himself toward Maggie. A warrior's arrow flew, striking Morrison's gun arm. Maggie dropped and rolled, a maneuver Maddo had taught her. The pistol fired, the bullet whining harmlessly over Maggie's head. Morrison tumbled from his horse, clutching his wounded arm, and was immediately surrounded by soldiers. His followers scattered like quail, some caught by the cavalry, others melting into the landscape to be tracked down later. In minutes, it was over. Maggie found herself on the ground, Mattow's arms around her, his hands checking her for injury. "The baby," she gasped. Oh. Her water had broken, the stress triggering labor. Winona was there in an instant, taking charge with the efficiency of long experience. "Into the cabin," she ordered. "Now." What followed was the longest night of Maggie's life. The contractions came in waves, each stronger than the last. She'd helped with births in the band, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. Mattow stayed with her, letting her grip his hand through the worst of it, murmuring encouragement in both languages. Winona and the other women worked with practiced skill, keeping her comfortable, monitoring the baby's progress. "You're fighting it," Winona observed during a brief respite. "Let go. Trust your body." "I'm scared," Maggie admitted. "Of birth. Of after. Of bringing a mixed-blood child into this world. Look what happened today. How can I protect—" A contraction cut off her words. When it passed, Winona smiled. "You protect by living, by showing the world what is possible. This child comes from love, not fear. Remember that." Outside, she could hear voices, the marshal dealing with the aftermath, warriors keeping watch, someone singing a protective song, her two worlds, standing guard while new life fought to enter. The final stage came with the dawn. As the sun painted the valley gold, Maggie gave a last, mighty push, and her daughter slid into the world. She was perfect. Dark hair, lighter skin than her father, but darker than her mother. Eyes that would likely turn brown, but were now the indeterminate color of all newborns. She cried lustily, announcing her arrival with impressive volume. "A warrior?" Winona pronounced with satisfaction. "Listen to those lungs." Mattow's eyes were wet as he held his daughter for the first time. "Beautiful," he whispered, like her mother. They named her Sarah Wichapi. Sarah for Maggie's grandmother. Wichapi meaning star in Lakota. Star-born daughter of Star Woman, bridging heaven and earth, two peoples and two worlds. The news spread quickly. By noon, visitors began arriving. Warriors who'd fought that morning, bringing small gifts, women from the band with advice and blessings, even some townspeople, curious but respectful. Thomas, the young man who'd warned them, arrived with an unexpected gift, a handmade cradle. "My grandfather made it," he explained shyly. "Said every baby deserves something made with love." Marshal Thornton stopped by before leaving with his prisoners. "Morrison won't trouble you again," he assured them. "Too much evidence this time. He'll hang for your father's murder." Maggie felt no satisfaction at the news, only a weary relief. That chapter of her life was finally, truly closed. Over the following days, as she recovered and learned the rhythms of new motherhood, the valley filled with temporary camps. Both communities, Lakota and white, seemed to need to witness this new beginning. On the fourth day, Chief Dakota arrived for the naming ceremony. Despite his age and the difficult journey, he'd insisted on coming personally. "This child," he said, holding Sarah up to the four directions, "will walk between worlds. She will know hardship, but also great joy. She will be a bridge, a teacher, a warrior for peace." The ceremony blended traditions, Lakota prayers and Christian hymns, sage and incense, drums and guitars. Maggie wore her mother's wedding dress, altered with beadwork. Mattow wore his finest traditional clothing. Sarah, oblivious to the momentousness, slept through most of it. That evening, as the visitors departed and quiet returned to the valley, the new family of three sat by their fire. Sarah nursed contentedly while her parents planned. "She'll need education," Maggie said. "Both kinds, traditional knowledge and book learning. She'll have it," Mattow promised, "and more, she'll have choices we never did." "The world's changing," Maggie mused. "Maybe by the time she's grown." "Maybe," Mattow agreed. But even if not, she'll have what matters: family, identity, strength to be herself. A knock interrupted them. Judge Watson stood at the door, hat in hand. "Sorry to intrude," he said, "but I have something for you. Morrison's assets have been seized. As his only living relative and victim of his crimes, you're entitled to compensation." He handed Maggie an envelope. Inside was a bank draft for a substantial sum, not a fortune, but enough to ensure security. "I don't want his money," Maggie said automatically. "Then use it for," the judge suggested, nodding at Sarah. "Education fund, security. Turn something ugly into something good." After he left, Maggie and Maddo discussed it. The money could buy supplies, tools, maybe even send Sarah to school someday. A good school that would accept her mixed heritage. "From ashes, new growth," Maddo said finally. "Your father would understand." That night, as Maggie nursed Sarah by lamplight, she thought about journeys. Her own from frightened runaway to confident woman. Maddo's from suspicious warrior to devoted husband and father. And now Sarah's journey beginning, with all its unknown turns. "What kind of world will you inherit?" she whispered to her daughter. Sarah's tiny hand grasped her finger with surprising strength, as if to say, "Whatever world you give me, I'll make it better." Outside, snow began to fall, unseasonable for late spring, but gentle, like a blessing. It covered the signs of conflict, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Maddo joined them, wrapping his arms around both. "She's strong," he said, "like her mother." "And wise," Maggie added, "like her father." "And loved," they said together, "by both." The oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows. In the corner, Thomas's cradle waited, symbol of unexpected alliances. On the table, the bank draft represented unwanted inheritance transformed into opportunity. But here, in this circle of warmth and light, none of that mattered. There was only this: mother, father, child, family, home. Sarah yawned, milk-drunk and content. Her parents smiled at each other over her head. Conversations in glances, love in silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The world beyond their valley remained complicated, often hostile, slow to change. But tonight, peace reigned in their small corner of it. Maggie began to sing, an old lullaby her mother had sung, the notes soft and sweet. Maddo added his voice, harmonizing, creating something new from something old. Sarah slept, safe in their arms, while outside the snow continued to fall, covering the world in possibility. 5 years had passed since Sarah's dramatic entrance into the world. The valley had transformed from a simple homestead into a thriving small ranch, with cattle grazing in the meadows and an expanded garden that fed not just their family, but often visitors from both communities. Sarah herself was a wonder, quick as a deer, bright as a button, chattering in both English and Lakota with equal fluency. Her skin was sun-kissed bronze, her hair long and dark like her father's, but with her mother's stubborn curl. She had Maddo's keen eyes and Maggie's determined chin, and a spirit entirely her own. This morning found her perched on the corral fence, watching her father work with a young horse. 8. Why does Stormcloud buck like that? He's learning, Maddo explained patiently. Like you learned to walk. Remember falling down? I never fell, Sarah declared with 5-year-old certainty, making her parents laugh. Maggie emerged from the cabin, wiping flour from her hands. She was teaching at the small school that had opened in the nearest settlement, a controversial appointment that had taken 2 years of persistence to secure. A married woman teaching was unusual enough. That she was married to an Indian had nearly derailed it entirely. But her students' test scores spoke louder than prejudice. Sarah, come help with the bread, she called. But I'm helping 8. You can help us both, Maggie said. It was a phrase she used often, this lesson in balance and dual belonging. As Sarah skipped toward the cabin, a rider appeared on the ridge. Maggie shaded her eyes, recognizing Thomas, no longer the uncertain boy who'd warned them of danger, but a man now, recently married and running his own small farm. "Morning, folks," he called out. "Got news from town." They gathered on the porch, Sarah immediately climbing into Thomas's lap. She'd adopted him as an unofficial uncle, much to his delight. "Government sending out new Indian agents," Thomas reported. "There's talk of changes. Schools they want to build, special ones for Indian children." Maddow's face darkened. They'd heard rumors of such schools back east, places where children were taken from their families, forbidden their language and customs. "They can't take her," Maggie said flatly. "She's legally registered as my daughter, American citizen." "That's the thing," Thomas said uncomfortably. "They're saying mixed children especially need civilizing. For their own good, they claim—" Sarah, sensing the tension, pressed closer to Thomas. "I don't want to go away to school. I like Mama's school." "You're not going anywhere, little star," Maddow assured her, but his eyes met Maggie's over her head, sharing concern. That afternoon, they called a family council. Winona had moved to a cabin nearby as age made traveling with the band difficult. She arrived with Little Bird, now a young woman of 15 who'd become Sarah's devoted babysitter. "We've faced threats before," Winona said pragmatically. "This is just another—" "It's different," Maggie argued. "Before, it was individuals. This is the government, laws, systems. We can't fight with arrows or legal documents." "Then we adapt," Maddow said, like always. They developed a plan. Maggie would use her position at the school to stay informed of any official movements. They'd strengthen Sarah's documentation, perhaps even arrange for dual enrollment in both the local school and traditional learning with the band. Most importantly, they'd build alliances. Over the following weeks, that's exactly what they did. Maggie invited townspeople to the ranch, letting them see Sarah as she was, a bright, happy child who could recite Shakespeare and traditional Lakota stories with equal skill. Maddow guided hunting parties that included white settlers, building respect through shared experience. Sarah, unaware of the maneuvering around her, bloomed under the attention. She showed visitors her pet rabbit, demonstrated how to track deer, taught them words in Lakota. Her innocence and enthusiasm dissolved more prejudice than any argument could have. The crisis came sooner than expected. On a hot July day, 2 officials arrived at the ranch with papers. Maggie was at school, but Maddow faced them calmly. "We're here for the half-breed child," the lead official announced. "New policy. All mixed-blood children must be evaluated for proper placement." "She has proper placement," Maddow said, "with her parents." "Sir, I understand your attachment, but the child needs civilized upbringing. It's the law." "Whose law?" Maddow challenged. "Show me." As they argued, Sarah slipped away. She'd been taught what to do in emergencies. Ride to town. Find Mama or Marshal Thornton. Her pony was small but fast, and she knew shortcuts the men in their wagon couldn't follow. She burst into the schoolhouse just as Maggie was dismissing students. "Mama men came for me." Maggie's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice calm. "You did right, sweetheart. Now let's go see the marshal." By the time they returned with Thornton and several concerned townspeople, a standoff had developed. The officials stood on one side, Maddow and arriving warriors on the other. "This is ridiculous," Thornton declared. "The child is enrolled in school, has a stable home, exemplary parents. On what grounds are you attempting removal?" The official consulted his papers. Indian blood. Policy states. "Policy be damned," interrupted Judge Watson, who'd been fetched by Thomas. "I've reviewed the territorial laws. No such policy has been legally ratified here. You're operating outside your authority." What followed was a heated legal debate. Sarah, clinging to her mother's hand, watched with wide eyes as her future was argued by strangers. Finally, Maggie spoke up. "Gentlemen, You're discussing my daughter as if she's property, not a person. Sarah, tell these men who you are." Sarah straightened, lifting her chin exactly as her mother did when facing challenges. "I'm Sarah Wichapi Black Bear. I'm 5 3/4 years old. I can read and write in 2 languages. I help Mama teach the little kids and help 8 train horses. I know all my Bible verses and all the star stories. I am Lakota and I am American and I am myself." She paused, then added with devastating simplicity, "And I want to stay home." The silence that followed was profound. Even the official looked uncomfortable, faced with the articulate child his policies would harm. Judge Watson cleared his throat. "I think that settles it. Any attempt to remove this child will be met with legal challenge at the highest level. I suggest you gentlemen return to wherever you came from and report that the Black Bear family is in full compliance with all legitimate laws." The officials left, but everyone knew it wasn't over. That night, both communities gathered at the ranch. What had been 2 separate groups 5 years ago now mingled freely, Lakota and white, sharing food and concern. "We stand together," Chief Dakota announced. He was frailer now, but still commanding. Threats to one family threaten all families. Plans were made. Letters would be written to sympathetic politicians. The school would document Sarah's exceptional progress. The religious community, both Christian and traditional, would vouch for the family's moral standing. "Why do they want to take children?" Sarah asked that night as her parents tucked her in. Maggie chose her words carefully. "Some people think there's only one right way to live. They get scared of different ways." "That's silly," Sarah pronounced. "Different is interesting." "Yes," Maddow agreed. "But not everyone is as wise as you, little star." Months passed. The threat retreated but didn't disappear. They heard stories from other territories. Children taken, families broken, cultures under assault. But here, in their valley, the alliance held. Sarah grew like her mother's garden, strong and vibrant, roots deep in 2 soils. She excelled at school, often helping teach younger students. At home, she learned traditional skills from Winona and modern ones from Maggie. She could birth a calf and solve complex mathematics, navigate by stars and read maps, pray in 2 traditions and question in both. Her best friend was Thomas's daughter, Mary, a year younger but equally adventurous. Together they explored the valley, 2 little girls whose friendship embodied possibility. One spring evening, as Sarah's 6th birthday approached, the family sat by the fire planning her celebration. It would be like everything in their lives: a blend cake and fry bread, fiddle music and drums, guests from town and from the band. "I want everyone to come," Sarah declared, "even the grumpy people who stare at us in town." "Why?" Maggie asked, curious. "Because maybe if they eat our food and hear our music, they'll stop being grumpy." Maddow laughed, lifting his daughter onto his lap. "You might be right. Food and music are powerful medicine." "Everything's medicine if you use it right," Sarah said, repeating something Winona often said. As they planned, Maggie reflected on their journey. From that frightened girl abandoned on the prairie to this, a teacher, mother, bridge between worlds. The challenges hadn't ended, might never end, but they'd built something stronger than fear. "What are you thinking?" Maddow asked, reading her mood as always. "About roots," she said, "how the 3 sisters support each other. Corn grows tall, beans climb the corn, squash shades the ground. Different plants, but they make each other stronger." "Like us," Sarah said, understanding immediately. "Exactly like us," Maggie agreed. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear sky. Sarah pointed out constellations, naming them in both languages. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. "Home," Sarah sighed contentedly, snuggling between her parents. "Yes," they said together, "home." It wasn't perfect. The world beyond their valley remained complicated, sometimes hostile. There would be more challenges, more officials with papers, More people who couldn't see past difference to find common humanity. But here, now, they had this, a family that shouldn't exist by some people's reckoning but did. A life built on love and determination. A future their daughter would shape with hands that knew both pen and earth, heart that held both hymns and ancient songs. The fire crackled, sending sparks toward the stars. In the cabin, Sarah's cradle, Thomas's gift, now held her dolls, a mix of corn husk and china. On the wall hung Maggie's mother's comb beside Mattow's father's war honors. History preserved and honored. "Tell me the story," Sarah requested sleepily. "About the Star Woman." So they told it, as they had many times, how Star Woman fell from her old life and found her true one, how Black Bear saw her truly, how together they made a new constellation that hadn't existed before. By the time they finished, Sarah was asleep, safe between them. They carried her to bed, this precious bridge between worlds, and returned to sit by the dying fire. "No regrets?" Mattow asked, as he had years ago. "None," Maggie answered, as sure now as then. "This is the life I was meant to live." They sat in comfortable silence, planning tomorrow's chores, next week's lessons, next month's gathering. Ordinary things that made up an extraordinary life. The night wind sang through the valley, carrying the scent of spring flowers and possibility. Somewhere, forces worked against them, but here, love had built something stronger than hatred, understanding deeper than fear. They banked the fire and went inside, to sleep and dream and wake to another day of building bridges, one sunrise at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate tales of love, courage, and bridging different worlds. Your support means everything.